In the 1970s and 80s, the Japanese Big Three, heck, with Mazda the Big Four, were unstoppable, so it's reasonable to think that their luxury brands Lexus, Infiniti and Acura were going to take over the world. Yet today, Infiniti is a niche player that's struggling to compete. Why has it failed to capture the world's imagination despite many reboots? This is the Infiniti story. The reason why Infiniti came to be is the same reason for the Lexus brand, which I covered in the Lexus LS video. The USA was and still is a very large market in which to sell cars. Japan had been successfully exporting their cars there in the 1970s, right at the time when small fuel-efficient vehicles were in vogue. This annoyed the established car companies in Detroit, who talked to their elected officials to go and do something about it. And so the US government pressured the Japanese government to limit the number of cars it would import into the US. That would at least slow those pesky Japanese companies down while Detroit got its house in order. Of course, those Japanese car companies weren't just going to take this lying down though, and they were going to find a way around it. The first idea was to build factories in the US or make joint ventures with US car companies. That would take care of the mass market. But if cars built in Japan were going to be restricted to a certain number, then those cars needed to make as much profit as possible. Ford had their Lincoln luxury brand and GM had Cadillac. Rather than Toyota taking on Ford and GM, they would now battle Lincoln and Cadillac, further eating away at the American car companies' profit margins. First out of the gate would be Honda with the Acura brand, with Austin Rover helping them get there with the co-developed Rover 800 Acura Legend. Toyota would launch the Lexus brand, and Mazda created, or at least attempted to create, the luxury Amati brand. Nissan wasn't going to be left out, so in 1985 kicked off their own program, naming it Infiniti in 1987, with a logo that could be seen as either Mount Fuji or a road stretching off into the distance. Infiniti's first cars launched in 1989. They had only 51 dealerships to cover the entire North American market, but those dealerships were aimed at the most affluent city areas. Infiniti teased their cars with a series of adverts showing serene scenery, intonating this was a new brand with high aspirations. Those 51 dealerships got just two models. The flagship was the Q45, a fast sports sedan that was the exact opposite of those serene teaser commercials. It would do battle with the new luxury flagship from Toyota, the Lexus LS, which had cost a king's ransom to develop. The Q45 cost a bit more, but it didn't seem to have the same attention to detail as the Lexus. The Q45's interior seemed a little less Mercedes or Jaguar luxury, and more the poshed up Nissan it truly was. I mean, where were the acres of wood that luxury cars were supposed to have? But it featured a brand new V8 that gave the Q45 better performance than its Lexus rival, and it stood a much better chance of getting you to your destination without a rattle or a tow truck than cars like the Jaguar. And to be sure, Infinitis kept their value. They backed up their claims of reliability with what they called the Total Ownership Experience Package. With ride and handling that matched what Germany had to offer while providing features like four-wheel steering, the Q45 set alarm bells ringing across Europe. Infiniti's second model was the M30. Like the smaller Lexus ES, this wasn't a brand new model, but a second generation Nissan Leopard two-door coupe, as Americans call them, previously only sold in Japan. The angular interior looked out of date and the exterior was already 3 years old, but on the road it had the same refinement as the Q45. Just 1 year later, Infiniti added a smaller sedan, the G20. Once again, they took a car from another market, this time the Nissan Primera from Europe, and added the premium Infiniti badge. The interior was again a sea of plastic, but at least it was high quality plastic. The equipment level though didn't help the luxury brand's image. There wasn't an airbag to be seen, the seats adjusted manually, and up front there was a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, no V6 or V8 here. That low level of equipment led some reviewers to put it up against regular runabouts like the Honda Accord, not what the luxury Infiniti brand was going after. But again, the car had a refined ride with good handling and a quiet cabin, and like the Q45 and the M30, despite the 4-cylinder engine, it was no slouch. The G20 showed Nissan had quality cars that could be sold as upscale Infiniti models, if only they could provide the correct level of quality inside. The M30 Coupe and convertible were based on the Japanese Nissan Leopard. The new Leopard was a 4-door sedan, so in 1982 the Infiniti M30 was updated as the J30. The new car slotted in between the G20 and the Q45. Some reviews referred to the new car as having unique or unusual styling, never a good thing to hear. In fact, the three Infiniti models didn't share much of a family resemblance, due to one being a custom car designed for the US market, the second a rebadge of a European car, and the third a rebadge of a Japanese car. But thankfully, Infiniti were listening to customer feedback. The new J30 got a 3-litre V6 from the Rapid 300ZX. Inside there was some wood, and not just one but 2 airbags with electronically adjustable leather seats. But like other Infiniti models, the rear headroom couldn't easily accommodate large Americans, and the low boot line meant there wasn't much luggage space. One criticism of the Q45 was the lack of a grille and large oval door handles that some felt cheapened the look. The first of these was corrected with the 1993 facelift, along with a better interior that now included dual airbags as standard, wood accents and better quality leather on the seats. All in all, it was a better car for the American market, but many had already made up their mind about Infiniti when it launched 4 years earlier, and sales were slow. The J30 hadn't captured the public's imagination with its odd styling and low spec. It was getting trounced by the Lexus ES, their biggest seller, so Infiniti launched the i30 in 1995, while still selling the J30 for another couple of years in case customers still wanted one of them from their now 153 dealers. The Lexus ES had a lot in common with the Toyota Camry, and the i30 was very close to its sister car, the Nissan Maxima, but it was really a rebadged version of the Japanese Nissan Cefiro. But being based on a Nissan platform wasn't a negative. After all, the Maxima had just won Motor Trend's Import Car of the Year. By adding a Q45-like grille, Infiniti showed that they were going in the right direction, giving the car some class and a family look and feel that the brand sorely needed. Infiniti kept expanding in 1996. They started selling cars in the Middle East and launched their first SUV, the QX4. This was another reworked Nissan, in this case the new Pathfinder, and inside it looked a lot like a Pathfinder with a bit of wood slapped on the dashboard. This followed Toyota's pattern of reworking the Land Cruiser into the Lexus LX range. Well, if it worked for Toyota, then why leave money on the table? Although the QX4 was late to the SUV party, it was one of the best handling cars in its class, and it had a price that made it a bit of a luxury SUV bargain, if you considered the Infiniti brand luxury. And you should if you drove the second generation Q45. Infiniti shied away from the daring looks of the original car, going with something that seemed to copy the Lexus LS. Inside there was the right amount of leather and wood to keep affluent Americans happy. Rear legroom got a boost, but at the expense of luggage space. It was just as fast as the old model, but the suspension was set up more as a quiet cruiser, something that American customers were demanding. To gain more sales and promote their sporty image, Infiniti sponsored cars in the Indy Racing League, and they even slotted a version of the Q45 engine into some of their cars. They finished in 3rd place in the championships in 2000. Infiniti expanded into Taiwan. The G20 ended sales in 1996, but oddly reappeared as a second generation 2 years later in 1998. Again, it was based on the European Nissan Primera. Again, it used a peppy 2-litre inline-4 engine. Again, it was a good deal. The top-of-the-line model was the same as the entry-level Audi A4. But given it offered much the same package as the previous G20, it was reasonable to expect it would receive the same reception, which it did. The i30 went up against the popular Lexus ES, and it too was updated in 1998. With each car, Infiniti was slowly refining their cars to what American consumers wanted, and the second generation i30 was a good example of this. It helped that it was still based on the Nissan Maxima that had been built for the American market, so it was the right size for American customers, and Infiniti gave it the right level of handling and luxury. Their lineup now consisted of 4 models, but parent Nissan wasn't doing very well. They'd been expanding with operations like Infiniti, but cars across Nissan's range weren't making money, and it forced them into a strategic partnership with Renault. This wasn't a bad thing though. It forced them to think long and hard about the profitability of each new vehicle, and it gave them access to Renault's parts to reduce development costs. I talked a little about this with the general manager of the first Nissan Qashqai, David Tuhig, and if you want to learn more about Nissan's problems at this time, then I'd recommend that video. The Renault-Nissan alliance didn't have an immediate impact on Infiniti. They were still very much North American focused, and there weren't many Renault vehicles that could be turned into Infiniti models, especially as Renault had never designed them with US regulations in mind. So the only changes at Infiniti were small and incremental. The i30 became the i35 in 2001, now that it had a larger 3.5-litre V6 engine. Infiniti also threw a $40 million advertising campaign behind the car to try to kickstart sales. There was also a third generation of the top-of-the-range Q45. It got Ford Scorpio-like bulbous front headlights and a large grille. Around the back, the raised boot line meant more space for luggage and a lower drag, and the body was 40% stiffer. The 4.5-litre V8 engine got the car to 60 in 6 seconds. Inside, the car went another step up in luxury. Rear seats could be heated with electronic adjustment, and there was rear HVAC controls. Up front there was the usual high spec, now with an infotainment system when this was the latest thing, along with steering mounted controls and a voice recognition system that worked about as good as you'd expect a 2002 voice recognition system to work. There was a backup camera and adaptive cruise control, and it had an analog clock sitting up front and centre, something that had become a bit of an Infiniti feature. This was Nissan not only going after Lexus, but all German players, and it packed quite a punch. Motoring journalists dubbed it the best Infiniti yet, and that could get curious customers to look at the rest of their range. But would Infiniti start to take sales from its rivals? That wasn't looking good. Infiniti was duking it out at the bottom of the luxury table with Audi, but sales would start to go in the right direction, thanks in part to the new G35 that replaced the G20, now available as both a sedan and a coupe. Infiniti ditched the old Nissan Primera platform for the new FM platform shared with the lauded Nissan 350Z. Given that pedigree, it should be expected the G35 could easily handle fast bends, and it did, with reviewers calling the handling BMW-like, high praise indeed. And the 3.5-litre V6 gave it rapid acceleration. You might think that being based on the 350Z that rear legroom would be cramped, but the platform was stretched so it was actually the same length as a Q45. Rear headroom though could have been better. Luxury cars were beginning to move away from wood trim, so the G35 had tasteful metal accents and there was a cool pop-up navigation system. The price was reasonable as well. Infiniti were fighting back. The M badge returned, but this time Infiniti was selling it as a sedan. The M45 launched the same year as the G35, designed to slot in between that model and the larger Q45, whose platform it shared. That spot was already taken by the i35, and both cars would be sold alongside each other until the i-Series ended production in 2004. Like the original Infiniti M, the new M45 was actually based on two Japanese Nissans, in this case the exterior of the Gloria with an interior that was very close to the Nissan Seema. Given it used the Q45's platform and V8 engine and many of the interior luxuries, on the face of it, it seemed like a bargain Q45. It was, of course, based on a car that was smaller inside, so you had to decide that if a little rear leg and headroom was worth an additional $10,000. But surely your friends could suffer a little in the back, and in any case, they could enjoy a dip in your new $10,000 hot tub. A year later, Infiniti launched the FX, their first foray into the world of crossovers, using the same platform as the G35. The shape was a bit of a novelty according to reviews at the time. They called it a crossover, but that was a term previously given to cars that looked like SUVs but weren't SUVs, cars like the front-wheel drive Honda Pilot and the Toyota RAV4. This was something different though. Infiniti had always been keen to position their cars as performance luxury, and the FX was no exception, calling it the sports car of SUVs. That was borne out with firm suspension that did its best to stop body roll, and the 3.5 litre or 4.5 litre engine that provided Porsche Cayenne levels of performance. It was combined with Porsche Cayenne levels of luxury, all for a price a lot lower than the new German SUV. Reviewers agreed if you wanted a car this shape, it was a great package. And Infiniti wasn't done with tall cars. In 2004, the QX4 was replaced by the much larger QX56. Again, it used the same platform as the Nissan Pathfinder, in this case the larger Pathfinder Armada. Infiniti was a brand that traded on its image of performance and handling, so they had their work cut out for them with this car. They went as firm as they could on the suspension. This car was never going to be fun in the bends, but then QX56 customers weren't about to take on the corkscrew at Laguna Seca. What they were looking for was luxury, and there was plenty of that on offer. There was the usual leather, wood and metal for those up front. The second row got their own heated captain's chairs, leaving third row passengers to slum it on a leather-clad bench seat. But given you could get almost all of these amenities on the equivalent Nissan model and save thousands of dollars in the process, why would you buy the Infiniti? How much was the Infiniti badge worth to you? The QX56 might be the new flagship and the first Infiniti fully produced in the USA, but the big seller was the G35 sedan, Infiniti's car to take on the BMW 3 Series. Sales were improving, and so surely an M Series update would keep sales growing. That might seem odd as the previous car had appeared just 3 years earlier, but the new car was based on the same FM platform as the G and the FX. Infiniti was consolidating to reduce costs. They were also giving the M a new family look that would appear on the next generation G Series and the option of a new smaller 3.5 litre V6 engine. Inside there was an iDrive-like control for the display, but there were also individual controls for many of those features, so its use was in most cases optional. There were small speakers built into the front and rear seats to give everyone the correct sound level. Maybe due to the lack of interest though, the Q45 would soon end production, making the M45 Infiniti's top-of-the-range sedan. With growing confidence in their lineup, Infiniti started expanding, first to South Korea in 2004, Russia in 2006, China and Ukraine in 2007, and then they announced that they were finally going to take on the tough European market in 2009. To continue this expansion, they launched a 4th generation G sedan that offered 4-wheel steering and even more speed. It borrowed the looks and a great deal of the parts from Infiniti's other cars, as was the new modus operandi at Nissan so that they could grow profits. The G35 continued to be a good deal compared to the competition and built on the reputation of the previous car. There would be another crossover, or oversized hatchback as Car and Driver called it, the EX, which complemented the larger FX. Again, it used the much used FM platform, and that was no bad thing. Infiniti was all about technological advances, and the EX was no exception, including a lane departure prevention system that was supposed to nudge the car back into the lane, but according to contemporary accounts it didn't work very well. But while Lexus, BMW and Mercedes sales grew in the US, Infinity's sales had stalled. It seemed the G35 couldn't beat the 3 Series despite a lower price. 2008 brought a second generation FX with improved handling that approached that of the G Series. Infiniti was trying to differentiate with its technology, and the FX came with emergency brake assist. The interior competed for prestige with the larger QX56, but despite this being a large crossover, reviewers complained it lacked rear passenger space, something of a common complaint with Infiniti's smaller cars as well. Infiniti made their big 2009 European debut with the new FX along with the EX and the G-Series Coupe and Sedan, or should that be Coupe and Saloon? Whatever they were called, they were joined by the new G37 convertible. These were the smallest cars in Infiniti's range and a good set of launch vehicles, mostly using the V6 engine, but the FX also came with a V8. Infiniti might be getting the measure of American customers, but they had a challenge appealing to Europeans. The wood to them looked glossy and fake, the ride didn't impress, and the V6 engine didn't provide the excitement or the fuel economy the competition could offer. And there was really only one size of engine, while the competition offered all kinds of engines, including diesels. To reviewers, the cars felt like merely up-spec'd Nissans, which did the new luxury Infiniti brand no favours in getting established. To make matters worse, dealers were few and far between. This was the market the German Big Three had sewn up. Even Lexus had a hard time competing in Europe, and they'd been at it for 18 years. And Infiniti happened to make this launch during the global economic crisis that hit all luxury brands across the world, including the US. Making progress in Europe would be an uphill battle. There was a new M-Series car in 2010, their largest luxury sedan, with a range of new engines from a 2.5 litre V6 to a 5.6 litre V8, and it would also come to Europe. There was even a 3 litre turbo diesel and a hybrid model. The G-Series also got the smaller 2.5 litre engine. BMW had its M models, and Infiniti introduced special IPL or Infiniti Performance Line versions, essentially lightly tuned versions of the main models. In terms of raw power, it wasn't that impressive though. The G37 Coupe's 0 to 60 time went from 5.3 seconds to 5.2. Infiniti were hoping now that the economy was stuttering back to life, customers would again be looking at its range, and in particular the boat-sized QX56 that got an update. It used an all-new chassis that came from the Nissan Titan truck, but despite its origins, the on-road ride and handling was much improved. Like the previous car, it was also sold as a Nissan, in this case the Patrol. The QX56's exterior was divisive when it launched, but everyone seemed to like the interior, with a level of refinement that took another step forward and a final row of seats that could be electronically reclined. By 2011, Infiniti was in many of the top markets around the globe, including Australia in 2012, so it made sense to promote the company in a motor racing series that was popular in those same markets. The Red Bull Formula One team used Renault engines, and as Nissan were joined at the hip with Renault, it made sense to sponsor that team. To encourage lackluster European sales, Infiniti announced the Etheria hatchback concept that would be built in Britain. Surprisingly, it was a collaboration with Mercedes and used the same platform as the A-Class. There were hopes to produce 60,000 cars a year. The Etheria was just a concept, but the new Infiniti JX based on the Nissan Pathfinder was real. Minivans weren't the coolest vehicles around, so many customers were gravitating to cars like this, SUVs with 3 rows of seats. With SUVs and crossovers being the direction the market was going, the new JX fit neatly between the FX and the QX56 and was a hit with customers. It quickly usurped the G sedan as Infiniti's most popular model. You did remember the FX was the smaller SUV and the QX56 was the larger one, right? Infiniti model names had never had much logic to them. There was the G, I, J and M that had been at first a coupe and then a sedan. Then there was the EX, FX, QX4, JX and QX56 SUVs and crossovers. What did it all mean? Infiniti commonly used the number in the model's name to denote the engine size, but as Nissan were finding out with their Z cars, in an age where smaller engines could produce more power, it didn't make sense to do this because the new models might look like a step backwards. Infiniti decided to do a big Q-themed renaming exercise. Maybe it was because Infiniti's new boss had come from Audi, land of the Q crossovers. The G-Series sedans became the Q40, the Coupe the Q60, the M-Series was rebadged as the Q70, the EX turned into the QX50, the newly relaunched JX was immediately renamed to the QX60, the FX became the QX70, and the QX56 became the QX80. Confused? Customers certainly were. The logic would suggest smaller cars had lower numbers, but the QX60 was longer than the QX70, and the Q60 was shorter than the Q40. To make things even more confusing, the Q40 and Q60 were a rebadged G-Series sedan and coupe, but at the same time Infiniti launched a new generation G sedan alongside the old model as the Q50. The salespeople at Infiniti dealerships must have got sick of explaining all of these changes. This was all to kickstart a new Infiniti that hoped to be selling 500,000 cars every year by 2020. The new Q50 was supposedly designed with Europeans in mind. It was finally a diesel sourced from Mercedes and a hybrid. Both were rapid and finally gave the fuel economy that Europeans craved. Those Europeans still weren't fans of the handling though, especially the new drive-by-wire steering system. This was a world's first and beat Tesla's Cybertruck by 10 years, but was widely hated by reviewers. And even US reviewers who preferred a soft ride bemoaned the new car was set up more for gentle cruising rather than hard driving. The consensus was the new car was worse than the old model. Good job the old version was still on sale. There was another new Infiniti, sort of, but only in the Chinese market. The Nissan Juke, everyone's favourite compact crossover, made its debut as the Infiniti ESQ. So just 1 year in, Infiniti had already abandoned their new all-Q naming system. Infiniti shelled out more motor racing sponsorship cash. They entered the Q50 in the British Touring Car Championships of 2015, but pulled sponsorship after only 3 races after a series of terrible results. With poor European sales, they also ended their Red Bull Formula One team sponsorship. But Infiniti hadn't abandoned its plans for Europe quite yet. The Etheria concept launched as the Q30 in 2015. It would be jacked up and sold as a crossover stateside a year later with the QX30 badge. After all their work to establish the brand in Europe, it was sad to say that this is how one British reviewer introduced the Q30.
This is a car made by Infiniti, and it's probably a car company you've never heard of.
2015 was Infiniti's best year in the UK, and they sold only 1,200 cars. All that European marketing had got Infiniti precisely nowhere. But at least Infiniti had saved on the cost of developing the Q30. The platform was from the Mercedes A-Class, as were some of the engines and many of the interior bits and bobs. But would you want the Q30 with all its strange curvy lines and unknown Infiniti badge on your driveway, or the same car with a 3-pointed star? Infiniti launched what they called the second generation Q50 in 2016, but that was a generous description as it was the same car with only a few technology updates. Other manufacturers wouldn't even have called this a facelift, but maybe this was all that Infiniti could do due to its small profits. They did update the Q60 Coupe by basing it on the updated Q50, although as the handling had gone backwards, that may not have been the best move. Thankfully, it was at least better than the sedan, but maybe trying for the mass market, it was set up more for comfort than a track day. It used a 2-litre turbocharged Mercedes engine along with the Q50's updated interior with its dual touchscreen display. Although in the US they were behind BMW, Mercedes, Lexus and now Audi, by 2017 they had at least caught up with Acura. Sales were going in the right direction, but they hadn't achieved the growth that other brands had seen throughout the 2010s. After all, the Q50 was their top seller in 2017, but had only just cracked 40,000 annual sales. 2017 would turn out to be the high point for the brand. Despite a second generation QX50 that launched in 2018, US sales dropped and fell even more in 2019. That same year, Infiniti finally threw in the towel in Europe after over a decade of awful sales figures. Ironically, the Q50 won the British Touring Car Championship the following year. The QX70 had ended production in 2017, and the Q30, QX30, ESQ and Q70 ended production in 2019. Those hopes of just a few years earlier of selling 500,000 cars by 2020 were now in tatters. Infiniti brought in a new leader, hopefully with new ideas, and there was talk of a fully electrified future by 2021. They even showed off a QX EV concept. Maybe 2020 would turn things around. Well, that didn't happen, of course. During the pandemic and afterwards, Infiniti sales continued to drop. There was a hint of a recovery in 2023, but this was less of a recovery of Infiniti and more a recovery of the whole automotive sector. This was despite the introduction of the QX55, a coupe SUV version of the QX50 designed to take on the BMW X4, as well as a new second generation QX60, again using the bloody hell, is that John Davis still doing Motor Week? And it's still going in the age of YouTube. The QX55's high-quality interior included zero-gravity seats, clearly a marketing term as gravity remained at 1G while sitting in one. I could hear a class action lawsuit coming along. In 2024, a third-generation $100,000 QX80 launched without a V8 engine for once. It made do with just a 3.5-litre V6. It might have included the luxury touches you'd expect to find on a Range Rover and the tech found in a Lexus, but after more than 30 years, Nissan's luxury experiment was still spinning its wheels, failing to get traction despite all-wheel drive. While making this video, I've been looking at Infiniti cars on the road with a new light, but it's a sign of their styling that I've often been confusing them with Hyundai's. That's either a good thing for Hyundai or a bad thing for Infiniti, but I think it's indicative of a car that doesn't exude prestige on the road. And if a luxury brand doesn't do that, they're going to have problems. When BMW's back was against the wall in the late 1950s, they focused on making a good quality car that beat the competition, the 700. It was their engineering smarts that got them out of a hole. They followed it up with another excellent car that anticipated customer demand. Infiniti showed some of this with the G Series, but even then they were butting heads with the BMW 3 Series, and that was going to be a hard battle to win. Nissan's luxury brand needs to make a strategic change, or it may find, come the next economic downturn, that it goes from infinity to zero. Nissan's metamorphosis throughout the years can be seen through its Z cars, and they capitalised on the crossover boom in the early 2000s with the Qashqai. Videos on both models are over there somewhere. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.